Just a quick preamble before this really begins. This is basically like a news show, hopefully once a week roughly, unless something massive really comes out. It deserves its own unique video. I've been thinking of maybe doing these types of videos for some time. We'll see if they really work out. I definitely want to refine how it works a little bit over the coming weeks, but it's generally just a kind of an amalgamation, kind of condensed Warhammer news for the week. There's a lot to cover. If you are somewhat like me and you don't have many limits in this hobby in terms of your interests, in terms of your scope, I kind of fondly refer to this hobby as kind of the collecting abyss. There's no ground level here. Right? It keeps going, one of the tremendous successes of Games Workshop is just the amount of product that it's able to produce on a weekly basis that just steamrolls its competition. So without further ado, here's the news show. So first up is the long-delayed Silverthorn Battletome. It's now available for pre-order, along with their new Endless Spells, the new Awakened Wildwood, custom dice, and War Scroll cards. These all look interesting. The Battletome contains a series of new abilities, 12 command traits, 24 artifacts, and 7 sub-factions that provide a variety of bonuses. As a Battletome that was, teased weeks ago, it's nice to finally see this out. We don't have points for the Endless Spells, but they offer kind of a mix of damaging and healing benefits. Notably, the Glade Worm and Vengeful Skull Root are both predatory spells, but the negative damage abilities do not affect Sylvaneth units, and the healing bonuses only affect Sylvaneth units. That makes them pretty low risk to actually use. GW also confirmed that if you're like me and you already own the old woods, that you don't necessarily need to use the new Wildwoods. You can still use the old ones. I would put a pretty strong asterisk next to that. Anytime that they replace a model, it's kind of goodwill gesture on their part to allow people to use the older versions, but this does have an expiration date, and it will eventually probably be phased out. So to complement the release, the community site also offered a free battle plan called the Black Oak. It's interesting, and you should go take a look. This week also saw the 5th Warband unveiled for the upcoming Warcry game. I'm very excited for this game, looking forward to it, and the 6th Warband is unveiled tonight. So this Warband is called the Unmade. They're from the realm of Shyish. There are a lot of missing limbs and seem to have purposefully removed their faces. A lot of people seem to really like this aesthetic. There's a lot of room for crossover potential here for conversions and things like 40k Drukhari, perhaps. The hooded figure, I think, I see a lot of parallel aesthetics between kind of the Necromunda Khador faction and the old Carnival of Chaos from Mordheim. Overall, I think they're very cool. I'm really enjoying the design space provided by having different Chaos factions reside in different realms. It's an unconventional look for Chaos models, and it allows for a lot of potential and opportunity. Next are these glorious Acostus Knights, and the Knight Porphyrion up for pre-order for use in games of Adeptus Titanicus. The name Porphyrion is the name of a Greek giant, and so I can definitely appreciate it, and it's fitting in among the theme of Titans. It works perfectly. In conventional terms, these are slightly smaller than the Warhand Scout Titans. In a game like Adeptus Titanicus, you need to ensure that there's sufficient variety and differences in scale. They've really nailed kind of like the Imperial Knights and the Warlord class Titans. And so the more things that they have there, just visually it looks better, and how the game plays. I spent the last few weeks myself assembling my own Titans, so I'm happy to see this range expand. And these were released at the 40K scale not too long ago through Forge World. The release in general is supported by a variety of cards and stratagems. So the Ethelorn Avengers, the old Wood Elf Blood Bowl team, is also up for pre-order. This is complemented by the Spike magazine, issue 6, new dice, cards, and a custom Blood Bowl pitch. These are beautiful models with a lot of motion. The tokens and accessories are pretty nice. I have yet to play my own game of Blood Bowl yet myself, but these look pretty beautiful. So for the Ruminator engine, there are basically 2 severed heads of kings. Make of it what you will, but it's probably a good guess that it relates to an upcoming Chaos release for AOS. There are some other kind of severed heads in, this is most definitely AOS. Almost all of them are kind of Chaos related. And the Battle Sister Bulletin. They previewed a few new kind of proto sculpts for the much anticipated Sisters of Battle release. Each model in the kit can be assembled with or without a helmet, which is interesting. I really like that kind of gothic German style kind of helmet that they come with. The painted model is just amazing. This is going to be an absolutely terrific release when it actually comes out. And finally, there are 2 new Start Collecting boxes for 40K. Thousand Suns and the Primaris Space Wolves, kind of traditional rivals. I'm really interested to see more of these kind of Primaris Start Collecting boxes come out. We'll see. It looks pretty good. And finally, if you're into The Hobbit, the Scouring of the Shire is being released here. Man, oh man, I don't know how much longer they can kind of maintain this. But, there's some interesting new models, some new models of Gandalf, and kits available to support this book. Looks interesting. I've never, as much as I've been a big fan of Lord of the Rings for most of my life, for whatever reason, I've never quite got into this. But, it looks interesting. It's kind of a part of the story that is very pivotal and important, and we'll see what happens. And then finally, from Forge World, I guess supporting the releases from Games Workshop, there's a Dryad star player called Willow Rosebark. I think she's been hinted at for some time, but obviously she complements kind of the Wood Elves that were just released. And there's also some interesting terrain and features that allow you to make kind of a hobbit hole for games that occur during the Scouring of the Shire. And finally, kind of continuing with the amazing Horus Heresy character series, which is just, I find Forge World models to be somewhat hit or miss in the last few years, but the character series has been generally pretty consistent with some amazing models. And here we have Blood Angel's chapter master Radaron, and he looks pretty nice. Just chopped off a big arm of a demon there. Okay, so for Black Library releases, The Hollow Mountain by Chris Wright is up for pre-order. This book continues Inquisitor Krall's investigation that started in the Carrion Throne. There's also a new audio drama called The Interrogation of Salvor Lermontov that bridges the gap between the both books. I really enjoy audio dramas. Just came back from a very long road trip, and we enjoyed several different dramas on that car ride. Really good opportunity to just chill and listen to some stories. And I guess in other Black Library news, books 11 through 15 of the Horus Heresy saga are once again available in hardback for a very limited time. And I guess new to paperback is the Ravenor Omnibus by Dan Abnett, of course. And Incarnation by John French. And Gods and Mortals, a collection of AOS short stories. That one might be tempted to get. I think Warhammer does very good in the short story space, and that one might be interesting. Okay, so in other Warhammer news, there was obviously the big Age of Sigmar update and FAQ. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. There's been plenty of videos over the past week really deep diving into this, but I'll try to do my best to provide a kind of a synopsis and my thoughts on some of the controversial topics that came up. So this gets a little complicated because there was an attempt here by Games Workshop to realign several armies with the General's Handbook, and many of these armies happen to be highly competitive in the current meta. In general, some armies had units reduced in points, and two of the most competitive, namely Skaven and Flesh Eater Courts, saw some minor point increases. Most of these changes were positive and the adjustments were fairly modest. Some things could probably be reduced further, while others could be increased further. And so overall, a little more balance was restored, but it wasn't a heavy-handed approach by the rules writers. It's, perhaps not entirely ideal, but it's still kind of a good compromise to ensure that armies are not nerfed too excessively. It's a good thing to ensure that the swings one way or another are not too far or unpractical. Good news is that this type of digital reevaluation of points seems to be something that GW will be doing twice annually. And provided they continue with the moderate approach, this will be kind of a positive development if you're into matched play. What we don't want to see here is just entire armies become, dramatically different in their competitiveness, just within a matter of months every single year. So, if they keep a more moderate approach, I think could be good. When it comes to the FAQ, there were some positive developments. Here's what I'll say. Some of the answers were most of them were fairly short and condensed. A lot of yes, a lot of no answers. That's mostly good, right? If they answered in paragraph form, it would inevitably create other problems. But sometimes if the answer is too brief, that can cause problems itself. And there were a couple instances where very detailed and complicated questions were giving, a yes or no answer. And one unintended side effect of this is that anything outside of the General's Handbook was rendered obsolete, including any releases between now and the General's Handbook, presumably. But clearly this cannot have been their intention. I think that's a very narrow reading of the rules. Anyone that tries to push us to that point in a game, I think, would be highly frowned upon. But there was also some rules released in White Dwarf and kind of limited edition models that were basically rendered unusable because they weren't in the General's Handbook. This honestly seems like less of an issue to me. As a long-term collector, the limited edition models have always kind of lacked longevity. No one's pushing to use Archaon on foot. The old Games Day model from, X number of years ago. Like, these things just don't have much practicality in the day-to-day game. Anytime you have a very specific select models that can only be found, only be bought at certain stores at certain times, they just cannot be part of the game as a whole for very long. It would just be ridiculous to make the game dependent on models and rules that are not universally available to all players. So, I always took those as pretty much a grain of salt. Some of them were really good. And the problem here is that GW, probably from a mistake of enthusiasm on their part, wrote some very cool rules for some of these unique models, and they happen to be very powerful. And they should probably stick to more generic things. So there was also a price increase on July 8th that went into effect. If I'm not mistaken, this is the second price increase this year. I haven't been keeping too close of a track on it. There seems to be a fairly wide variety of products that went up, and some people have been pointing out that there are differences in prices between similar kits. So Rhinos and Land Raiders, there are the variety of different types of those kits, and the prices are not consistent. The more specialized Land Raiders that have, if I'm not mistaken, all the parts for the regular Land Raider plus extra bits actually cost less than the regular Land Raider now. So, little weird things like that kind of get under people's skin. Generally speaking, I'm not concerned about price increases. Probably puts me in the minority. I'm certainly not rich, but I look at this hobby as very much a kind of a luxury, and in that context, none of this is really necessary. But I do think it does definitely kind of chaff a little bit, given that we know Games Workshop in recent years has been incredibly profitable. So anytime they increase further prices, always just seems like trying to take advantage. So, Underworlds for young explorers. This is basically a bolt-on rule set for Warhammer Underworlds that has kind of simplified rules to encourage younger audiences to play. Now, I love Underworlds. I play a lot with my wife. But I don't know if you could accuse the game of being too complicated. I guess this just reinforces that the game is designed to be a gateway for new players. And in that context, I'm all for these type of incentives to encourage a younger player base. The more new blood we have in the hobby is always a good thing. So it'd be interesting to see if this in any way rolls into other games or in other contexts. But there you go. And there's also a blurb this week about, obviously, Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse was released last week, and they were, promoting the fact that you can play Warhammer 40,000 in now 3 different levels, from Kill Team to regular Warhammer 40,000 and now Apocalypse, so 3 different scales. I would point out that those of us that have been in this hobby a long time know that you could definitely take this type of concept further. You could incorporate Adeptus Titanicus for one, and really the old Epic would be a good way to have a much higher scale type game, even further than Apocalypse, and Battlefield Gothic as well. If they ever reintroduce these games, back in the day, this was always the intention, was to have a series of connected games that kind of relive a campaign on different scales. So I'd love to see that. And interesting here, there was a kind of a cosplay video here, or not video. Whenever GW really promotes someone in the hobby, I think that's really terrific. And there was a woman who created kind of a cosplay outfit for Belisarius Cull, and it's just a beautiful kind of custom suit. Everything's kind of made by her, and it really puts other cosplay to shame. If I were to try to do something cosplay, I'd probably show up in like a hat and a towel or something, and I don't know what I'd be, but standing next to her would certainly put me to shame. And I will just point out that one final thing this week is that if you're into Warhammer video games, There's some free wallpapers for Vermintide 2. Their upcoming expansion for Winds of Magic is really cool. It incorporates Beastmen, so I'm all for that. And these are screenshots from their kind of teaser video that they put out a couple of weeks ago, and you can find that on YouTube. All right, thanks for listening. See you next week.